Hello everyone, welcome back to week 4 of game-based instruction. And this week we're going to take a look at the question, what types of games are there? Okay, before we get into the new content for today, I just wanted to review last class a little bit and some key takeaways. So starting with constructivism, we talked about a lot of ideas there, one being active learning. Remember, with active learning, we want to encourage students to talk about their learning as it's occurring, and that's going to kind of further cement that learning experience, right? So that's the concept of active learning. We talked about Bloom and Gagne's taxonomies, where we can identify the exact skills we want students to learn. We talked about the concept of transfer, where similar skills may share a developmental level, okay, or they may not. They might transfer from one idea to the next, or they might not connect. And we also talked about that zone of proximal development, the ideas of scaffolding or differentiation. And the general idea there is that learners are individuals with specific educational needs. And we can fit those just right to find that zone of proximal development. Okay, before we get into the new content for today, I just wanted to review last class a little bit and some key takeaways. So starting with constructivism, we talked about a lot of ideas there, one being active learning. Remember, with active learning, we want to encourage students to talk about their learning as it's occurring, and that's going to kind of further cement that learning experience, right? So that's the concept of active learning. We talked about Bloom and Gagne's taxonomies, where we can identify the exact skills we want students to learn. We talked about the concept of transfer, where similar skills may share a developmental level, okay, or they may not. They might transfer from one idea to the next, or they might not connect. And we also talked about that zone of proximal development, the ideas of scaffolding or differentiation. And the general idea there is that learners are individuals with specific educational needs. And we can fit those just right to find that zone of proximal development. And finally, we talked about humanism. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That the students have certain needs that must be met before they can learn anything. We also talked about self-determination theory, where there's 3 main factors driving student engagement or that intrinsic motivation, being relatedness, competence, and autonomy. So those ideas help us bring our last unit to a close, right? And our goal last unit was to justify the use of game-based learning using educational theories, which hopefully you guys were able to do on that grant writing project. Okay, I'm eager to see what we come up with there. And now we can pivot to our next unit. Okay, so this unit, our goal is to be able to evaluate the potential of a game to help students meet learning objectives. Okay, so this is a game that is new to you, that you're just seeing for the first time, and we want to learn how to take a look at that and decide, is that going to help us in the classroom? Okay, and to meet that objective, we kind of have some sub-objectives, some essential questions that we're going to look at each week. Okay, in week 4, we're going to look at what type of games are available. Okay, so we're going to have a break from the hardcore educational theories and the psychologists, and we're just going to look at types of games this week. In week 5, we're going to look at how learners interact with games. Okay, we're going to take a look at gameplay. Learner 6, we're going to look at the educational environment that we're creating with those games. And then week 7, we're going to take a look at difficulty and how that is aligned to our learners' needs. Okay, so that's kind of the goal for this unit, with the end goal of you being able to evaluate the potential of a game to know if that can help students meet learning objectives or not. Okay, and we're going to do a project that will mirror that towards the end of this unit. Now, before we get into all the types of games there are, we want to start with the basics, right? Where can we find games, especially games with an educational context or an educational use? There's lots of different options. Okay, the first one I'm going to talk about here, school subscriptions or resources. Okay, depending on the type of school you are or the district you work in, there might already be games or resources that accompany textbook subscriptions and things like that, or online resources that are available to you that you don't even know about. So when looking to add games to your learning, I would first look at the resources you already have, the subscriptions that are already available to you from your district or your department or whatever that structure looks like, and start there. Okay, sometimes there are games built in by the textbook company that accompany the different units. Like, that's a great resource if you can find that resource that's already adapted to your curriculum. Like, perfect. Another option is word of mouth. Okay, there are other teachers out there that teach similar content to you, and they're going to talk about games that they've found. Okay, whether this is Twitter, Facebook, at conferences, just talking in your department, right? People are going to find good games. They're going to tell you about them. It's a great way to find games. I've already heard a couple of you guys in your discussions have talked about playing Guess Who to teach different vocab aspects of language learning. Like, that's awesome. That's a great way to use that type of game, and the more we can spread that around, the more game-based learning becomes kind of wide stream, or mainstream, I should say. And finally, you can find games in stores and catalogs, right? There's a lot of gaming-specific stores, especially when we're talking video games. You can look at the Steam or the GOGs out there. There's also, Amazon is a wonderful place to find board games and the like, or Target.com, or all these online websites. And there's obviously the old school catalogs, and I'm sure there's books of board games and catalogs full of different options there. So definitely in our day and age, there's a ton of places to find games. If anything, there's almost too many games out there, and the difficulty isn't in finding them, but it's in just navigating the massive amount of them to find something with that educational value, right? That's the tough part. All right, so let's say we're out there, we're looking for a game. Maybe you have a specific purpose in mind. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're just looking for a game to add to your curriculum. Well, once you get to that store, you're going to notice right away that there's a lot going on to describe these games, right? There's topics and themes at play. There's tags and keywords. And similar to books, games have genres that they fall under. And there's all sorts of cross-population with all these ideas, right? You can be multiple different tags or multiple genres in the same game. You can cover multiple topics. So it can get really confusing really quick if you don't know how to navigate the space or what to focus on. So we're going to talk about kind of some of that today. What I would like you to focus on if you're someone that's new to the world of gaming, that's just taking a look at what can we find to implement in our class to help kids learn. So before we dive into this world of gaming tags and genres and keywords and topics, I think the first one we should notice is the educational tag for games. If a game is called an educational game, it can mean a lot of things, but in my experience, it usually means it was built with learning objectives in mind. Okay, so the educational games are going to be the easiest for you to implement because someone has already planned out how this game meets a learning objective. Okay, so kind of step one is already there. Now, traditional games are built with fun or competition in mind. Okay, they might not necessarily be about learning. You might have to add your own details or information that bring about that learning or make that connection apparent. Whereas with educational games, that job is already done for you. There's a term in gaming called plug and play. The idea that you can just plug a game in and start playing immediately. Well, the educational games are kind of plug and play in our world of instruction, where if an educational game does a good job of meeting that learning objective, I can just insert it into my curriculum and let the students play. Okay, so educational games are going to make your life a lot easier. They're not always going to be available, especially as we branch out to different learning objectives and different things we want students to learn, there may or may not be a game out there that teaches that content. And there might be a traditional game maybe that you can adapt to meet that learning objective. But obviously, if there's an educational game already out there that is built towards that premise, that's going to save you a lot of time if we can utilize those types of games. Okay, the next type of game I want to talk about, the next distinction I guess I want to make, is through representation. How are students being represented in the game world? Okay, are they inside the game? Well, that's an in-person game. Okay, is the game represented by miniatures on the table? Well, that's a tabletop game. And if the game is represented through some kind of electronic means, usually through video, we call that a video game, right? So these are kind of the three big picture categories that I see games fitting into. They're either an in-person game, a live game, a tabletop game, or a video game. And let's take a look at these and kind of take a look at that representation and the different tools used in each type of game. So if we're looking at in-person games, the player is represented by taking part in the game. Okay, so they are in the game itself. Equipment of in-person games can range widely from, you might need a field with different markings on it. You might need a specific ball or racket. There might be safety equipment. Maybe you need a helmet to play the game or a uniform. Okay, if we're taking a look at tabletop games, on the other hand, you're represented by game pieces when playing the game. Okay, how you move your body does not affect the game. It's how you move the pieces that affect the game. Equipment in tabletop games are boards, dice, cards are common. You can use pencil and paper, miniatures, okay, that sort of thing. And then finally, video games. Okay, I think in 2024, most of us know what a video game is. But now we have some kind of electronic representation. The equipment is the computer that we're playing on, the mouse and keyboard that you're using to input information into the game, right? The console. Maybe you have an Xbox or an Xbox controller, and that's how you're moving your character around. Things like smartphones, arcade games, right? That kind of thing is all an example of video games. And you can see, based on the equipment that you have in your class or the equipment you have available at your school, maybe not all of these games are an option for your class. Okay, maybe you just have computers, so you can only look at PC games. Maybe you have big tables, but that's it. So you're really just looking for some kind of tabletop game or some tabletop adaptation of a game to utilize in your class. Or maybe you're in a physical education class and taking part in the game is a big part of the game. So you're pretty much exclusively looking at in-person games so that the student can get a workout as well as learn some kind of team knowledge, possibly. Another important aspect of games is how many players are there? How many players can play in the game? Okay, there are single-player games where only one player gets to play at a time. There are multiplayer games, okay, where there's two or more. And we also have team games where we know there are going to be groups of players working together. Okay, so that lots of options there and lots of different sizes and lots of different configurations. Okay, do these teams compete with one another? Are they working together? Okay, multiplayer, same idea, which kind of goes into our next idea. How do these players interact? Is this a cooperative game? Or is this a competition-based game? Okay, are players interacting to solve puzzles together? Or are they competing to figure out who is the best at something or who will win, right? So lots of options there as well. Okay, and I want to finish here with what types of genres are available. This is a very kind of open idea. Genres can mean a lot of things. Okay, similar to books, a genre might mean that your game fits into a specific type, a stereotype. It might fit into There might be a specific gameplay element or a specific concept in the game, right? But a genre gives you an idea that it fits in this greater body of work, essentially, this category. And similar to books, a game can fit into more than one genre. So let's take a look. There's lots of gaming genres in the world. I went to Wikipedia here to just give us an idea, but depending on where you're looking, they're going to fit these things into different genres, and they might call them slightly different names. But Wikipedia, when talking about in-person games, refers to sports, lawn games, business games, or simulations. Or on tabletop games, they talk about dexterity and coordination games, board games, dice games, domino and tile games, pencil and paper games, or guessing games. Okay, so you can see just the variation. And we can take these categories and break them down even more. Okay, for example, there's sports games that are individual sports, there are team sports, there are ball sports where we're using a ball to run the game, there are field sports where we're playing on a specific field, right? There's all these additional categories that we can start adding into if we would like to. But I think just being able to understand that there are these categories is kind of the first step. And then you can start processing which categories may help you best as an instructor, right? Which genres fit in best with your content area. Okay, to keep going, additional video game genres. The role-playing game. Students are playing a specific role. Simulation games. Strategy games. Sports games. Okay, a lot of potential here for educational value. I think specifically in the simulation and strategy realms, you can really hit a lot of kind of real world analogies, right? What better way to give someone a real world experience than to simulate that real world experience directly in a game, right? And kind of seeing what that looks like and how that works. But that's what these genres kind of communicate to us. You know right away in a construction sim that students are going to be building something, right? In a management sim, they're going to be managing resources or managing manpower or managing finances, right? Something. And we can draw upon those management experiences in the classroom. And once again, not all of these genres translate well to the classroom. Okay? Something like a war game or a monster taming game might not be the best thing to have in your classroom. But maybe there are, turn-based tactics games where we have kids thinking strategically that are school appropriate that we can find. So really these genres are kind of an introduction to the game, but then you have to dig deeper and you have to keep looking to figure out if this game does have that educational aspect kind of hidden underneath, so to speak. To keep going, there are massively multiplayer online games. These are games with thousands, if not millions, in some cases, of people playing at the same time. Okay, Wikipedia talks about there's other notable genres. Okay, there is a board or card game version of video games, right, where they're just recreating the board game in a video atmosphere. And a variety of other games you can see there. There's also genres by purpose. Okay. Sometimes the purpose of the game dictates the entire genre. Like I didn't realize an advert game is an advertisement type of game. Okay, maybe you can remember being a kid and opening a box of cereal and you get some game. It's a knockoff version of Dune. Like I remember playing a Chex Quest and spending a lot of time on this game that came out of a cereal box. And as you can see, Wikipedia does give a shout out to educational games there in our genres by purpose. And to finish off with, Wikipedia also talks about sandbox or open world games. okay, where the world is your oyster to build in. It's your sandbox. You can be creative within that game. I think a lot of potential there for the sandbox building games and sandbox creation games. Definitely for some educational aspects. So that's all I really wanted to cover this week, was just the types of games and how I want you to look at a game when you see it for the first time, and to go out there and practice this. So for our week 4 discussion, I do want you to go investigate a game. So I'd like you to find a game you'd like to investigate and answer the questions below. I would like you to pick a game that you're not familiar with. Okay, the goal is that we're practicing looking at a game that is brand new to us and figuring out, does this game have educational value or not? And today we're just going to start at the beginning, where we're just looking at the web page and figuring out kind of what is this game about on kind of that surface level. So the way we're going to do that in our discussion, we have six points available, so there'll be 6 questions. Number 1, I want to know, what is the name of the game? So go find a game, tell me what the name of it is, and then give me a short description and a link to either the game's website, store page, or a link to a list of rules if this isn't something you buy, right? If it's an in-person game. Number 2, is the game an in-person game, tabletop, or video game? Right? I just want you to be able to categorize, how is that player being represented? Number 3, what equipment is used? Will you need any equipment not provided with the base game? Okay, this is absolutely essential. This seems like a simple question, but as an instructor, if you don't know that you need additional equipment, or you don't realize that, there might be some technical issues running this game and you need to think things out ahead of time, it can completely sink your lesson. So we got to know what equipment's used and what do we need to provide in addition to that base game. So if I order a box of Monopoly, is everything in there to play Monopoly, or do I have to order something specific on top of that? Next, question 4. Is the game single player, multiplayer, or a team-based game? Right? How many players are there? If it is a team-based game, how many are on a team? Then number 5, if it's a single player game, what kind of strategic thinking do you think is going to happen in the game? And if it's a multiplayer game, do you think there's cooperation or competition in the game? And how so? And then finally, to finish, I want to know, what genres does the game fall under? And what does that tell us about the game? Okay, so this week's discussion, pretty straightforward. Go find a game, investigate it, answer these questions. Right, the goal is that we're starting to process, the first time we see a game, what are the aspects of it that we need to be aware of so that we can use it in our classroom. Right, and these 6 questions are the first kind of 6 things I want you to think about there. All right, so that's all I have this week. Next week, we'll take a look at gameplay. Specifically, we'll look at how do learners interact with games. So you guys have a great week. Hope that discussion goes well. Feel free to email me or message me on Canvas if you have any questions. Remember, I have office hours Tuesday, Wednesday at 4 o'clock as well. So have a great week and feel free to reach out if you need anything.